Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. My name is Dr. Brian Henning, and I am Professor of Philosophy and Environmental Studies at Gonzaga University. It's my honor to serve as the Director of the Gonzaga Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment. Informed by an abiding commitment to a just society and care for the planet, the Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment serves Gonzaga University and the broader regional communities by promoting innovative interdisciplinary scholarship, teaching, consulting, and capacity building on the climate, society, and the environment. The center itself is hosting a number of events this semester, both in person and online. On your screen is a list of some of those upcoming events, and I'll try and remember to put this up on the screen again at the end. Our next event is at the end of the month with Doug Howell and Northwest Beyond Coal. I also want to draw your attention to an event for those of you who are in and around Spokane. We're holding the 3rd annual Spokane Candidates Climate Change Forum. I hope that you consider attending that event, where we invite local candidates for Spokane City Council and School Board to come share their views on climate change. A lot of good events. You can use the QR tag there or the URL at the bottom of your screen to register for those free events. They're all free and open to the public. Quick bit about Zoom. Closed captioning has been enabled. You can turn that feature on or off at the bottom of your Zoom window as you prefer. At present, only myself and the speaker are going to be able to unmute themselves. Later on, I'll make it so that selectively people who are interested in participating in a question and answer session will be able to unmute themselves later. Feel free to use the video on or off as you like. Remember that at any time you can change the view or orientation of your screen by going to the top right-hand corner of your Zoom window and changing the view to the one that you prefer the most. The chat is currently enabled and you're free to use it to make comments to those assembled. However, should the chat become disruptive, I will change the settings so only the comments will go only to the host. Beyond chat, a helpful way to share feedback during the talk is to use the reactions option at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can feel free to give a thumbs up using that little reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window if you like. Finally, our event this evening is being recorded and will be shared later via our YouTube channel. You can go there and subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified when those things are posted. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to acknowledge the land on which Gonzaga resides. In the spirit of the Jesuit practice of composition of place, we acknowledge that the first people of this place, the people of the river, hold the cultural DNA and the spirit of this place. It's their ancestors who are here and bring forth the power of this place, the knowledge that comes from the land. We want to acknowledge the Spokane tribal people, and we're grateful to be on this land and ask for its support as we work to manifest our intentions during this gathering of hearts, minds, and spirits. If you're joining us from somewhere else in the world and you want to acknowledge the indigenous people whose land, on whose land you reside, feel free to share that in the chat. And now it's my very distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. When we created the Climate Center and launched it last April, and we were thinking about one of the, what the speakers we might invite to campus this fall. We immediately started to think about Dr. Cobb. John B. Cobb Jr. was born a Methodist missionary to missionary parents in Japan in 1925. His schooling was interrupted by 42 months of military service in World War II. When separated, he attended the University of Chicago, completing a PhD in the Divinity School there, where he was introduced to neo-naturalism and especially to the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead. From 1958 to 1990, Dr. Cobb taught theology at the School of Theology at Claremont. Together with David Griffin, he founded the Center for Process Studies in 1973, and through this and other organizations, he's promoted the study of Whitehead and of the ecological civilization Whitehead's thought calls for. Dr. Cobb is the author of more than 50 books, including the first book ever published on environmental ethics in 1971. The book is titled, "Is It Too Late?" Please feel free to use your reactions button at the bottom of the screen to give a hearty welcome to Dr. John Cobb, who will be discussing building communities in a dying civilization. Welcome, Dr. Cobb.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this invitation. And I'm very happy to have a chance to share my thinking about the question. And the question was open-ended, but I decided to make it about communities. And since I think that community is a factor that is seriously lacking in our country at the present time, and it's not adequate anywhere in the world, and that if we want to have a future, we need to work at the restoration and the creation of new communities. So I have to begin, however, by saying, let me confess before I launch into my talk that I do not know what will happen. Still, I think our actions must be guided by our guesses. So I engage in a lot of guesses. Sometimes it turns out that some actions seem appropriate to a number of possibilities. My view is that building communities is one of those actions today. I will begin with a very brief and general indication of what I mean by communities. They are groups of people who feel some identification with one another and at a deep level place cooperation before competition in their relationships with other people in the group. Today, many communities are virtual. That is, the members are scattered geographically. These communities are of great value, and I hope we will all build them. However, the communities most needed for a livable future are local. Families need to live together to be in community with one another in the fullest sense. When food and shelter are not assured, they can help each other to survive. Groups of families living in a village can make of that village a community of communities. Its chances of survival are much greater than those of a village in which no family feels mutuality with any other, and all compete. Groups of villages and cities, etc., that constitute a nation often bring about a community at a higher level. I grew up in Japan, and at that time the emperor did not have much political power. Also, his personal character was of little importance. Nevertheless, the office was sacred. The occupant embodied being Japanese. Many Japanese were willing to die for him. No doubt that strong feeling of responsibility to the nation and all of its citizens has eroded some. But I think the Japanese people as a whole can still be viewed as a strong community. My advocacy of communities recognizes that strong community feelings at any level can lead to competition and even mutual hatred between communities. The strength of community among Japanese had many wonderful results, but the persons they conquered do not have positive memories of Japanese imperialism. Building communities must not focus only on isolated communities. It aims to build communities of communities. Communities of communities of communities, and so forth. After World War II, European nations that had been fighting each other for centuries decided to become a community of national communities. It is well to note that at the outset, that modern philosophy and science generally work against community by their deep assumption that individual things are primarily, even essentially, competitive. Hence, from the modern perspective, my calling for the building of communities is sentimentality. people may be led to act as if they cared for one another, but this action is for the purpose of gaining benefits for oneself. I believe, on the contrary, that each individual person is already a community of cells that cooperate to make the human body function, and that the relationships which make up a family involve real participation in forming one another. We are members one of another. My thesis is that whatever happens to human beings and to the other creatures that make up the human environment, being in community with one another improves the chances of survival and of good life. Competing for what is left ensures that few will survive. Working together in support of all who are left will greatly improve the outcome. Even if we all starve together, that process is better than fighting over the scraps. The statement that civilization is dying can be easily justified with a variety of meanings of civilization. That is, dying doesn't necessarily mean that it will die. It means that it is heading in that direction. For example, our relation to one another as fellow Americans is currently becoming less civil. Democracy requires some confidence in the democratic process and in the basic humanity of most Americans. This has dramatically eroded as the minority seeks to regain power over the majority by destroying that confidence. Democracy is dying, and it may indeed die, but it may not. Renewal of democratic values is also possible. If community feeling could be strengthened, and if communities are in community with other communities, great improvement is possible. I would also like to say that if people with time and money also wanted to check the growing divide, much could be done. The actual disagreements are not nearly as serious as the current rhetoric implies. For example, even though there has been an attempt to turn abortion into an absolutist question, this is in fact very difficult. Those who are committed to consider only the rights of the mother or only the rights of the fetus are not so numerous. Most people think that the interests of the pregnant woman and the interests of the unborn child should both be considered. They can engage in discussion. I'm not suggesting that such discussions would put an end to disagreements, but negative feelings about those who privilege the mother, about those who privilege the unborn child, are likely to soften when they understand that they are not indifferent to the mother and they're willing to discuss how to help her. There are other issues that cut across party lines. Many followers of Trump are hoping that he will break the excessive power of the elite. Many progressive Democrats share the desire to end its domination. Of course, definitions of the elite vary, but for both, wealth is a factor. Discussions between progressive Democrats and Trump's followers will not end all disagreements. For example, Trump's followers are likely to put PhDs as a group on the elite side, while Democrats may give them some extra authority. But discussion will show that there is extensive overlap of interest, and much can they be worked on together if they stop demonizing one another and listen. The followers of Trump are proud and grateful that he has ended, for the time being, the trade agreements that shifted power from governments to corporations. Many progressive Democrats share the value of these Republicans. They should join in expressing appreciation to Trump, and they may find other ways to cooperate with his followers. Democrats should acknowledge that they tried to make use of widespread prejudice against Russia to weaken Trump because of his Russian connections. They tried to make a mountain out of a molehill. Today, Trumpites make outrageous statements about Biden. They're trying to get even. On immigration issues, despite the rhetoric, there is not really much difference between the two parties. Discussion will reveal this fact as well as some real differences. But when the differences are accurately formulated, mutual demonization will end. We ask why, if real differences are much less than supposed, the mutual criticism has been so vicious. At least in part, both parties gain from their mutual hostility. Democratic leadership gets more money from those who hate Trump than from those, that far smaller number, who are enthusiastic about Biden. The religious fervor that Trump generates among many followers opens their pocketbooks in a way that analysis of real issues would not. But it would be possible for reasonable members of each party to change the public climate by working together to distinguish real issues from the lies to which both are currently addicted. Because modernity teaches that we are all individuals looking out for our own gain, it contributes to the current decline. So does the decline of the middle-class American church, which countered this modern teaching to some degree and prized positive relations, at least among its members. Perhaps we might, as a nation, decide that our schools ought to teach individual loyalty to one's group and even genuine concern for other individuals. Of course, currently, modern schools exclude the teaching of compassion. But if I'm right that modernity is dying, people are beginning to reject the modern mind and its denial of the facts in the process of claiming that facts are all that is. Let modernity die so that humanity can live. Sometimes doctors restore someone who is dying to health. Cultural change can save whole societies. Maybe this is happening. Outside of schools, people increasingly know that there is more to life than modern schools allow. Reductionism is getting a bad name. Modern civilization is dying. People are less fearful of affirming real experience against it. Reductionist thinking could give way to holistic thinking. Competition could give way to cooperation. New life may appear. That does not mean that the earlier diagnosis that society was dying was wrong. This is to say that building communities might reverse the movement from the dying of the modern world to the birth of a community of communities of communities of communities. I am suggesting that we can be confident that working to build communities of this kind, even in a dying world, is well worthwhile. Sadly, we must recognize that among the possible futures, there are some that would have no place for communities. In relation to such futures, the task is to build communities to resist those movements. I read recently that our technicians have built a nuclear bomb 20 times as destructive as the one we dropped on Hiroshima. Worse still, our government has ordered 100 of them. I'm not sure that any human beings will survive the explosion of all of these. If there are no survivors, obviously, all the building of communities would make no difference. But if some survive, even a nuclear war, that they stop competing and working together to rebuild will be of great importance. Meanwhile, we who do not want the genocide of the world's people need to organize communities of resistance, especially in the United States. Even without war, we can imagine a future in which humans are a minor part of the world's inhabitants. Some are noting that the planet's resources could comfortably and sustainably support a population of 2 billion. Already futurists are expecting that humans will not be needed for most jobs. Artificial intelligence can outthink us humans in most matters. The elite might just decide to let most of us die and let machines take over our work, while giving the elite fewer problems. When topsoil is gone or poisoned, they can manufacture food. Perhaps they can also supply sexual satisfaction. Here too, there is little place for communities in the outcome. But human communities might be helpful in resisting the full actualization of this largely depopulated world. Less likely than any of these outcomes is that human beings all over the world will choose cooperation. That is, community over competition. That is, mutual destruction. We could choose to turn the world into a community of communities of communities of communities, etc. 90% of the money now spent on war and preparation for war could be spent on improving topsoil so that it would absorb the excess carbon, and in reorganizing cities so there would be no need for private transportation except bicycles. There would be no motor transportation and no fossil fuels would be needed to heat buildings. People would live near where they work, so families would have more time together and more time to work on the problems of the village or neighborhood. Schooling would be voluntary. In that scenario, communities are central throughout. Whatever we accomplish in developing communities would contribute to building the society which would be fully sustainable and definitely not dying. The reaction to such proposals is generally that they are not realistic. If being realistic means that the proposal has large support, then this criticism is correct. There is no indication that any American with political influence is considering anything of this sort. Our educational system, our agricultural system, and our economic system all work against these proposals. But these are proposals that could be implemented. They are realistic in the sense that it is not hard to imagine their implementation. Suppose we read in the newspaper that Biden had gone to China to talk with Xi about cooperating to turn the world around from dying to new life. He could, although that would be enormous opposition. Of course, he would be called a traitor, since he put the continuation of human civilization above American dominance. And his plane might have an accident. On the other hand, at some point, our elite might be persuaded that it would be better to share power in a living world rather than to have complete control over a dead one. I have spent the last 50 years working and hoping that a world like this would become our shared goal. Such sharing would make the whole world a community. I would envisage that Latin America, Africa, and the Near East, and perhaps Southeast Asia, would model themselves on Europe and become communities of national communities. China and India would already be such communities of communities. And the rest of the world would organize appropriately. Then the world as a whole would be a community of these regional communities. Representatives of 8 or 9 regions would meet to make decisions that could only be made at the global level. We might ask why European success has not led to similar movements elsewhere. The answer is that, in fact, it has. If these movements had not been strongly opposed in Africa and Latin America by Europe and the United States, the world would have advanced far toward realizing this vision. But control and exploitation by European and American interests would have become more difficult in Latin America and Africa. And this outweighed any idealist sympathy in shaping American policy. But a change in American policy is not impossible. A world ordered at the most inclusive level as a community of regional communities is quite possible if Europe and the United States allow it. Such a planetary organization would not end the world's problems. Its effectiveness would depend on whether throughout the world the priority of cooperation over competition was accepted. This in no way means that competition is eliminated. Much enjoyment and much good can be contributed in that way. But healthy and healing competition operates in the context of a larger collaboration. Sports provide examples. Consider baseball. Baseball teams are certainly competitive. If they did not seriously and honestly compete, baseball would be of little public interest. But from childhood, players are taught that sportsmanship requires mutual respect between the teams. Actual enmity between them ends the sport. Equally, if there is no goal except defeating the opponent, if rules are regularly broken when the umpire is not looking, or if teams compete in bribing umpires, the sport is ruined. Healthy competition is between communities that are part of a community of communities. In that context, there is room for intensely competitive behavior. Ecology as a science, shows how the interactions of participants in an ecology can gradually improve the whole and its parts. These interactions are typically easy to view as sheer competition. Wolves chase deer in order to kill and eat. Once age slows a deer down, even a little, it will be dinner for the wolves. As a result, few deer experience the problems of old age. Each generation of deer is also likely to be slightly faster than the previous one, since the slower deer die younger. Of course, sickness plays the same role. The deer as a group benefit from the competition, which of course works in a similar way for the wolves. Seeing this way, that purely self-interested behavior serves the greater good, scientists have been strengthened in their goal of explaining everything in terms of individuals seeking their own interests. The neo-Darwinian theory of evolution takes this as axiomatic. Differences emerge in the genetic story by chance. Most of them reduce the ability of the organisms to compete, but occasionally one improves that ability. New species emerge. Evolution can be explained exhaustively by chance and necessity. Modern science denies that cooperation plays any role in the world. But this theory turned out to be wrong. At least there are important exceptions. Lynn Margulis focused attention on the emergence of the eukaryotic cell, the cell that makes up our bodies and all living things, and discovered that it did not come into being in this way. One bacterium swallowed another, and this allowed them to jointly constitute a new kind of organism. To her, this seemed to be a matter of cooperation rather than competition. She found this to be an element among bacteria in other roles as well. This discovery distressed most students of evolution who wanted evolutionary thought to fit comfortably into their established understanding of science generally. The story of how she was ignored and refused funding for her research is a sad commentary on the power of reductionistic thinking in science. One suspects that if one looks at many events seeking elements of cooperation, more evidence for its role in the world will be found. I believe that in other parts of nature, as in human beings, underlying the enormously important role of competition, one can find a deeper ordering that involves cooperation. There are many features of the cosmos that equally well could be different. Scientists consider them a matter of chance. A good many of these apparently chance features turn out to be necessary for the emergence of life. The appearance is that the universe has ordered itself in such a way as to make life possible. Purpose appears to play a role. But scientists as a group subscribe to a metaphysics that excludes purpose. That means that they are forced by their metaphysics to declare that the ability of this cosmos to support life is just a matter of chance, a very small chance. They toy with quite fanciful notions of millions of universes, positing that only this one supports life. Hypotheses of this kind, having little clarity and no evidence, have not in the past been considered scientific. But like the absence of cooperation, it is dictated by metaphysics, and scientists now seem to privilege metaphysical speculation over evidence. It is not impossible that a significant number of leading scientists will decide that this is a serious mistake. If the evidence points to cooperation and purpose as playing a role in the world, scientists should include those in their account of what happens. If this occurred, science could more easily be integrated into a worldview that supported cooperation and intentional community. This may be no more likely than an American offering to cooperate with China, but it is not impossible. And if it happened, it might make it easier for a president to support such cooperation. Another locus where the modern rejection of purpose and cooperation clearly operates is economic theory. This theory, like so much of natural science, is based on the view that individuals are metaphysically distinct and competitive, that not all human behavior fits this model is overwhelmingly evident, but systematically ignored for the sake of the metaphysics. Because it is so hard to make the case that mothers never do anything for the sake of their babies, sometimes economists acknowledge that their theories do not apply to individual family members, perhaps the separate and competitive units required by their metaphysics are nuclear families instead. But there has been little interest on the part of economists to explore the implications of this qualification. The evidence supports the idea that the way the economy functions in communities in general does not fit the model. Accordingly, it ignores or denies the existence of communities. But it is possible that respected economists will study the economics of communities and acknowledge that they exist and affect what happens. Once they open up in this way, some of them may study economics for community, recognizing the reality and importance of this phenomenon. They might even acknowledge the existence of a well-developed ecological economics. It might then become possible that our schooling system could encourage recognition of the importance of communities and work to create them, especially communities that are open to be parts of more inclusive communities. Modernity was founded on the human nature dualism. Much of its self-destruction stems from that. To a large extent, the modern university and the modern government act on a dualistic understanding. For example, for economists, the value of any natural entity is what some human being will pay for it in a human market. However, modern science is now very explicit in denying this dualism. Human beings are part of nature. Sadly, science makes this assertion based on its extreme reductionism, so that the claim of unity, which is entirely correct, did not open its thinking about nature to a deeper level of study. It is therefore not possible for students of human behavior to treat human beings as part of what, influenced by the natural sciences, they consider nature. So whatever they say about themselves, in fact, they remain radically dualistic. Nevertheless, that science has demonstrated that there is no metaphysical distinction between humans and nature has encouraged others to make important healing moves. Pope Francis in Laudato Si called for integral ecology. That means that human beings are or should be wholly integrated into natural ecologies. To understand oneself that way is transforming of both thought and life. It puts an end to modern reductionism and mechanism. It puts an end also to the anthropocentrism that has allowed us to destroy the rest of nature. Many students of science of the natural world experience the integral ecology of which the Pope spoke. Some of them write movingly about birds, or monkeys, or trees, or even octopi. If more scientists could learn from this literature that stays close to evidence and experience, they could help to change the way economics teaches us to deal with the natural world and guide us into sustainable living. This could happen. Perhaps it is already beginning to happen. There is a close connection between the idea of an ecology in science and a community in referring to a group of mutually cooperative human beings. But it may be best to keep both words. Membership in a community has conscious and voluntary aspects that we do not want to minimize. The mutual dependence of the parts probably rarely has that character in the rest of nature, except as human beings play that role. We participate somewhat differently in a human community than in a natural ecology. Nevertheless, it is well to think of human communities as in community with ecologies, taking on new characteristics as human beings are included. Of course, for the most part, modern humans destroy natural ecologies for short-term gains rather than participate in them. The change in the organized community of scientists from supporting modern destruction of ecologies to encouraging participation in them may be happening. It could happen much more fully and with greater public effect if scientists did not feel so committed to a mechanistic metaphysics. If it did so, science could guide us and lure us toward a human community organized to fit into the natural ecology. It probably won't happen, but it could. Universities are collections of academic disciplines. Each is organized to produce increased information on some limited topic with carefully drawn boundaries. All of them are encouraged to limit themselves to value-free facts based on Kant's distinction between pure reason and practical reason. But whereas Kant thought both were important, the modern university has chosen to limit itself to pure reason and gives no indication that it considers what it excludes, that is, values, to matter. Its main teaching, therefore, is nihilism. When no attention is given to better or worse actions, behavior continues to value some things. Efforts to satisfy sexual desires, to acquire money, and to exercise power over others continue. They do not need to be taught. As the predictable consequences of this teaching mount, the question of how to expose our youth to ethical reflection will arise. Should they be indifferent to the fate of the planet? Are values really so relative that they must be dismissed from academic consideration? In fact, most universities teach quite strongly that cheating on exams is not acceptable. They are not value-free. Outside the classroom, they are likely to act as if they thought that rape was not acceptable. Indeed, values play a large role in out-of-the-classroom rulings. If universities find them important in life, might they not consider them worthy of consideration in a classroom? The prohibition of expressing values in classrooms is not, in fact, absolute. It would probably be impossible to enforce strictly. In fact, valuing is as much a fact as is knowing. It is possible that universities will even allow discussion of the future of academic disciplines and whether this is the best way to organize themselves. In my view, academic disciplines prevent serious thinking about important matters. Is this the proper role of higher education? Is it not possible that human survival is important, should be considered, even though it is a value? Currently, we have to work for human survival with very little help from the university. I think that the overall influence of the university supports the killing of the planet more than supporting those actions that could help humanity survive. If universities encouraged open discussion of this topic among interested faculty and students, making their resources available to them, we could hope for rapid development of proposals for action that had behind them the prestige of universities. Cultural and technological change might follow. Perhaps many trustees, administrators, and faculty members will decide that it is better than the promotion of nihilism. Rapid change is possible. My point in all this is not that I expect the changes I have listed, but that it is not pure fantasy that changes favoring a communitarian world could occur before the inevitable catastrophes reach the level of threatening the continuation of the human species. The modernist beliefs and assumptions that continue to lead us to self-destruction are not profound convictions based on cumulative human experience. They cannot withstand critical security. Such beliefs are a matter of tradition and habit. One would like to think that universities would open themselves to discussing them critically. If you agree with me that there is much, then there is much that you can do. Mainly, you can ask naive and innocent questions about why this and why that. If you are talking with a faculty member who seems concerned about what is happening to food production when climate is more and more chaotic, you can ask if his school is doing anything about the problem or encouraging studying it. If he says that it is not, you can ask why, or whether he thinks it should. Or if someone in academia expresses distress about the lack of moral discipline among youth, you can ask whether your school system is teaching them how to live good lives. It is probable that he has never thought about such matters. Simple questions sometimes initiate trains of thought that go somewhere worthwhile. Other helpful role is to shift the emphasis from how to respond to problems to how to prevent the problems from arising. Modernists tend to accept the current state as what is given and ask how to improve it. For example, we have been complaining that so many people from Honduras try to enter our country. What should we do with them? There are no good answers. But if we ask why they are leaving Honduras, we're likely to learn that the United States did not like the results of a democratic election and replaced the president-elect with a military tyrant who would do our bidding. The result may have been favorable for our imperial ambitions, but miserable for the people of Honduras. If we want people to stay in their home countries, we should not support or impose dictators who are likely to harm them. We should support human community in Honduras. There are millions of people who are critical of Western medicine along these lines. It does very little to prevent disease and a great deal to heal it. Many think the reverse priority would be better. If we are interested in disease prevention, healthy communities are a major part of what helps. The pattern is very important in environmental issues. A good many people live in areas close to the ocean that have to be abandoned as oceans rise and storms increase in intensity. As more and more people are involved, we will give attention to the question, where should they go? For decades, we have been calling for changes that would prevent these problems. There has been little interest. We have built our cities in such a way that a great many people require a great deal of transportation just to get to work. For many of them, a private automobile seems almost necessary. Our task then is how to power it without emitting more carbon. But it would have been possible to build our cities so that most people live close to where they work. They could walk or ride a bike. There would be a good chance for a healthy community life to develop. Simply calling attention to past mistakes may heighten awareness of ones now being made. It also may prepare people to think about the probable consequences of decisions they are making now. Sometimes current policies about factory location can be effective. Rather than plan to put all the factories in one part of the city, there may still be possibilities of scattering those that can be good neighbors to homeowners. Whether we focus attention on how to keep things from getting worse or on responding to the crises engendered by past mistakes, a central part of the answer will be communities. The most important communities are groups of people living near to each other, planning and acting for the common good. They are real communities if the members know each other and care about each other. Some of us, even now, can begin generating the relationships that actualize such communities. If you are doing that, I thank you and congratulate you. May it become widespread. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cobb. Everybody's, one of the disadvantages of not being in person is we don't have a nice raucous round of applause thanking you.
Well, I think a round of applause is nice, but it can easily be done without.
Okay, well, we just did. So with the time that we have remaining, I would really love to facilitate some discussion. I posted in the chat 3 ideas for how you might do that. First, you could post a question in the chat publicly. Second, you could post it just to me, and I could receive it and relay it. And third, if you would like, you can use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen to raise your digital hand, and I could invite you to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question directly with Dr. Cobb. While everyone is gathering their thoughts and thinking about what they might want to ask you, I'll start with the first question. A few years ago, I was at a conference with you in Claremont, California, and I recall you saying something like this: it's probably no longer possible to avoid the collapse of civilization. At best, I think you said something like, we can maybe develop some good ideas to have on the shelf to guide the rebuilding process after the collapse. And I'm just curious now, I think maybe 5 or 6 years later, do you still believe that? Do I remember correctly?
Yes, you remember correctly. And of course, these things are matters of degree, they're not absolutes. I think that our civilization is in the process of collapse. I don't see any signs that we are taking that seriously enough to make the changes that would avoid it. And I think that's about where I was at the time we were talking before. But I think it may help to recognize that we are going to collapse not because there is no other alternative, but because we're not willing to make radical changes. So I was putting the emphasis in that direction. That we are constantly, it's not that decisions have long since been made that already determine the collapse. It is that we, day by day, keep making decisions that prevent the collapse, we make decisions that continue the collapsing process. And I just keep hoping that that will awaken people. If we can avoid it, if we don't have to go through this period in which climate goes crazy and the food production becomes extremely difficult, and fighting over the scraps will mean, that can easily mean nuclear war. It doesn't have to mean nuclear war, but that is one of the ways in which there would be a dramatic collapse of civilization. So different times I try different strategies. So far, none of them have worked, but
keep at it.
I don't give up too quickly.
Kent Myers asks, Japanese community might have developed from the need for water management for survival agriculture. Do we in the US have any vital material local basis to bind us in local cooperative community?
I think that lots of things are happening. For example, in coastal cities, the coastal city is going to become less and less habitable. If the people of the coastal city will really work together and be willing to consider making some real changes, they may be able to build walls in the right place, whatever. I just mean, if they become a community that works together, there is a better chance of the city surviving than if they are simply continuing in the fractured state, which most cities are now in. So I think cooperation is, some people will be thinking, where can I move in the city where I won't be damaged? That kind of thinking guarantees that the whole thing will go down. If everybody will work together to see, well, how much of the city could we save? Even if the part of the city you're living in is not part of it, you cooperate in figuring out what the best would be. They may even find a place for you in the part that they save. These are two different approaches, and both take part, and both take place. I don't mean that in the political order of cities, there is never any cooperation. But it bothers me, it upsets me that universities don't support that cooperation.
Let's focus on that just a little bit more. I think you had a rather provocative phrase in your talk when you said something to the effect of universities are encouraging teachings that are killing the planet.
Yeah.
Two ways you could answer the question, I guess. One would be citing examples a little bit more clearly exactly why you think that's the case. But a second opportunity would be to say, if you were president of a university, how would you organize it in order to try and embody your ideas?
Yeah. Well, I will start with that. And of course, you understand the president of the university could not make the changes that I would like.
Well, you're a philosopher.
I like to say maybe, while we fantasize.
Yes.
But what I would like to see higher education developed around discussions of the topics that are most important for human life and for the survival of the planet. But that's a totally different organization.
What if people said that we do that now? We are already doing that: sociology, psychology, science, nursing.
None of them are guided by the important questions.
Why not?
Well, I mean, why don't you give me an example of one that a university might claim this was dealing with well already?
That the university is already dealing well with those questions?
Yeah, I thought that was your part, the university.
Well, I mean, so let's say that University Gonzaga says we're graduating women and men who are trying to be for and with others. and so we're trying to see and seek to solve the world's problems. So our sociology students are trying to do that in a social context, and our psychology students through psychology, and biology through biology. And so they would say we're already doing that.
Well,
would you disagree?
Okay, what they're doing is preparing students to work on narrowly defined problems. And the issues of the world are not a set of narrowly defined problems. And if you work on the narrowly defined problems as narrowly defined problems, you won't really deal with them. The problem of climate change, of course, it can be studied in purely scientific terms. But if you don't deal with it in terms of the change in lifestyle that would be required to slow it down, the scientific term, I mean, I'm not minimizing the science. If you don't know the science, you're not going to be able to do anything. But the university, if it was really concerned to educate its students so that they would help the world find its way through the crises that it now faces, you could educate some students to be specialists, but the ones that are most important are the ones who would have to look at the issue in its totality and see what kinds of fundamental changes might give us a chance.
So more interdisciplinary, more synthetic, less disciplinary?
I think that you see, the higher education has not always been based on what are now called academic disciplines. Academic disciplines were not developed for the purpose of teaching. They were developed for the purpose of research. Now, if you have a university that is committed to research on the question of how to prevent the world from continuing on its present path, but the academic disciplines are not oriented in that way. You have to define problems very narrowly in order for them to fit one discipline or another. Or you might have the same problem dealt with by 5 disciplines. But then you're still not asking the question that has to be answered. And the universities are not organized for the purpose of dealing with human problems. They're organized for the purpose of advancing research in specialized areas.
Gene Richards in the chat, Richardson puts it this way: we actually teach people how to compete in our schools. We need to teach people skills of cooperation. Universities are focused on assisting their graduate to be successful within the current paradigm.
Exactly, exactly. And that things are going on within the current paradigm is just the way things are, unless people are aroused enough to say, it's not working, we got to do something different. And
David Randall asks, or makes a comment, I believe that for the human race to survive, we will need to change the culture of the United States and consumerism. Yes. I read a book decades ago called Steady State Economy. Our use of resources would be regulated, as well as the wealth of individuals. I recall that you and Herman Daly wrote a book in maybe 1990 called For the Common Good on ecological economics. How would you briefly explain the difference between environmental economics, which is rather mainstream, and ecological economics, which seems to me to still not be very well appreciated or studied?
You have understated it. I don't think any ecological economist has a job in a university. If you want to know what happens if you are heretical by university standards, you can study the career of Herman Daly. But there are other people, what I just mean. No, ecological economics, there is a group of people who care, and it may be that some still have a job in the university, I'm not sure, but there's certainly no growth of interest. It is, if you think in terms of the interconnectedness of everything on the planet and of the relationship between the human environment and human beings. And if you think in terms of how human beings and the environment are not that separable, integral ecology, if you approach matters with that mindset, then you have a chance of asking the questions that the world most needs the answers to. But there's no way of doing that in the contemporary university.
would you say that environmental economics is trying to make the current economic situation better reflect the economic value of natural systems without changing the paradigm?
Yeah. I have not read enough of what people do in that field, but I would be surprised, for example, if the way of valuing things has changed from being completely anthropocentric.
So Juliana says she's a senior here at Gonzaga, majoring in economics and minoring in environmental studies in order to change our economy to consider our natural world rather than ignoring it and using it. So maybe she feels like, and feel free, Juliana, to put your hand up, and I'd be happy to unmute you if you wanted to follow up on that.
Yes,
so at least
I would love to hear what she has to say.
let's see. Feel free, Juliana, but don't feel pressure if you aren't up to it. That's okay. So I got a offline question, John.
Yes.
So the person says, climate change is a human-caused problem. Why do we as a society not emphasize anthropology, sociology, psychology, and other social or humanitarian approaches or indigenous wisdom to raising its relevance in the public eye and work together as a global community? How can we get Gonzaga University, for example, to highlight a local community psychologist from Moscow with a community resilience lab or local permaculture advocates?
Well, of course, the difficult, I mean, you see, once you have a system that is set, everybody tries to fit into it. So even if if people in one department, well, I'll just give concrete examples. There were two departments that did not go along with the model of the academic disciplines. And they were anthropology and geography. And both of them wanted to continue holistic approaches. They have both become marginalized in the university. I mean, that is what I understand. I haven't done the research that would allow me to make sense, but I think there are fewer departments of anthropology today than there were 20 years ago, fewer departments of geography especially. It was interesting that when Herman Daly, we were talking about ecological economics, when it was clear that he couldn't continue to be in the Department of Economics. The way they were treating him was completely unhuman. He was invited to join the Department of Geography at LSU. He chose not to do that. I mean, obviously one problem would be if you don't know much about geography, you hate to be a professor of geography, but the geographers understood that he was thinking about economics in terms of the whole physical system. And that's what they wanted, that they wanted to teach people how to look at the world in terms of what's actually happening to the planet and to every section of the planet. And they thought that the economy was the most disruptive part of the world. So to have an economist who cared about changing thought patterns sufficiently so human beings would not act that way, that made sense to them. So within universities, there have been people who really tried. So at present, if you push that way, Gonzaga would play a considerable role in terms of prestige in the American academic world of higher education. I think that there is enough recognition of the seriousness of the problem that some university might get away with making a break. And that if that happened, other universities might move after it. When I'm trying to fantasize how change can take place, that's the sort of, we need things to happen quickly. We can't work to improve things slightly so that in 20 years, universities are going to be dealing with important issues. If they don't deal with important issues in the next 10 years, wow.
Dr. Cobb, Kevin Coons writes, Dr. Cobb, what is your take on the new administration's adoption, I'm assuming we're talking about the Biden administration's adoption of multilateralism and the growth of the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, I'm both of those things are excellent. Biden's history has been that of a corporate Democrat. And I think his actions have been much better than I had any right to expect from a corporate Democrat. I don't know exactly what he means by those moves. And I don't think they mean that he really wants to change the paradigm. But I hope he does, and I certainly don't. If people make moves, bold moves in the right direction, I want to clap my hands and not say, "Oh, but you didn't go far enough." You can never go far enough. So if it's a move in the right direction, let's celebrate.
Another question from, and thank you for your patience. You're doing well? Got it?
Oh yes, I'm
all right. Let me know when.
I would love to be there with other people talking. I mean,
me too. So if anybody wants to,
that feels better than doing it.
I know.
But it's happening. It's good what you're doing.
People are. It's sometimes easier to type it out and have me read it, but I do wish someone would raise up their digital hand and feel free. I can unmute you and you can ask the question yourself. So this one, the sports fans out there. So Gonzaga, when some people have heard of Gonzaga, it's unfortunately not because of our commitment to social justice, but our basketball team. So this question is, the sports are so lauded in the university, and they're very much about learning to be excellent competitors. What sports could replace those to focus on cooperating for mutual good? Not sure if you have thoughts about that or not.
No, I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, that sports encourage competition rather than cooperation, I think are there sports, or should we get rid of sports?
I wasn't trying to end anything about what we're doing now in sports. Now, frankly, I think professional sports may tend to press sportsmanship pretty hard at times. But I think that the sports between colleges and so forth are normally very healthy.
So you're not going to try and get rid of our basketball team. All right, understood. Okay.
No. I was using that to celebrate, to show how you can have intense competition. We don't have to get rid of competition in order to have cooperation. Right. But it won't work if you don't have a strong commitment to sportsmanship on the part of. If the only goal of the team is to win, and any kind of bribery of umpires or wounding of the opponent that you can get by with is okay, it's no longer that's competition taking over without any.
We've got a
ground, and I don't think that's happening. I didn't mean to be speaking against sports in any way.
Gotcha. Dr. Dunn, if you are able to raise your hand, I would love for you to ask your question directly to Dr. Cobb if you're willing. Shannon, are you still there? If you raise your hand, I can see you at the top of my list, and then I can invite you to unmute. Oh, there you are. Since you're my colleague, I can put you on the spot.
Okay.
Hi.
Now you've been unmuted, so I'm eager to hear you. Yes.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, Bob. So I went to Claremont School of Theology.
Uh-huh.
I got my master's degree there. You had since moved on, and but you're legendary figure, along with Marjorie Suhaki and David Griffin and others. So anyway,
if you had Marjorie, you had the best.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for your talk. I just wondered if you'd say a little bit about theology and the role of theology, in part because I feel like often more progressive Christian voices, whether, I don't think it's intentional, but they've ceded ground to, more sort of a certain group of Christian climate deniers who've been very vocal, and have a certain kind of theological anthropology, right, that animates their ideas about the use of the earth, and human domination of the earth, or progressives who have been kind of disenchanted, right? I guess it's kind of a clumsy way of saying it, but in the sense of Charles Taylor.
It would be a wonderful topic to have an extended discussion of.
Yeah.
I will say some things that are relevant, but of course not answer your question in an inclusive way. And I'm a Methodist, so I'm going to talk about the Methodist Church. And the Methodist Church in the 30s had a theology. Now, nobody was required to adopt it, but when the bishops spoke, they spoke in a way that was consistent with that theology. And all the Methodist seminaries included it, at least among what they taught. And that was we called it Boston Personalism, and it was based on one of the German idealist philosophers, Lotze. It had a very strong, it was part of the social gospel. So we had a social gospel grounded in a German idealist philosopher. And I think that worked pretty well. So that, for example, I was brought up in a context in which pacifism was a much discussed topic. And so before deciding to join the army, I wanted to help in thinking about it. And so the Methodist student movement had a national conference on the subject, and it brought very good people to help us think about it. Well, to me, one should be able to expect that one church would help one in that way. But that way of thinking, both the social gospel and the Boston personalism, philosophical background, I'll say something else positive first. The liberal Protestants did not have any effective resistance to Hitler in Germany. Liberalism tended to be so bound up with the culture, and only a countercultural movement would be useful when Nazism takes over the culture. So neo-orthodoxy had far more prestige in theological circles in this country. And bright young people who wanted to teach theology in Methodist seminaries were not interested in going back to this naive past. Yeah, when I use this language, I think you understand what I'm saying. Now, what was the response? One possible response would have been to have national conferences trying to figure out whether we Methodists could find any theological agreements so that we could have a theology as a denomination. And, but nothing like that was tried. The resolution was, we'll just let everybody think for themselves. In other words, there will be no longer any Methodist theology. I think that was a terrible mistake, but at that time, we veterans were just eager to come back and get back into local communities and have our families and have them bring them up in the church. So the church denomination flourished without having any theology. Now, the shift in academia was also against theology, because from my point of view, value-free teaching of theology is not teaching theology. I mean, you can learn about what other people have thought, but to teach theology is to help people think figure out what they believe. From my point of view, I can informing them that so and so says. I mean, I think it helps a lot to know what some other people have thought. I spend a lot of time teaching people about Barth, even though they all knew that was not sola scriptura was not my thing. Okay. So we liberals shot ourselves at the foot as far as I'm concerned. And we no longer have any position to present as an alternative. Now we have substituted for having any theological position being very open to everybody. And I think openness is great. I mean, we should be open to people regardless of their physical condition, their race, even to their beliefs, and certainly their sexual orientations and all those things. So I don't think those things are bad, but that's unless they're grounded in something that unifies that whole approach and grounds it. It doesn't have any ability to stand up in a cultural climate in which the default position is atheism.
It sounds like it is you've hit a good long question, I think, Dr. Dunn, because if we had another hour, which we don't, and I'm not, I would point out that the Catholic Church, and I'm a philosopher, not a theologian, has more unity, but doesn't seem to have much unity in terms of its has a theology, but it doesn't seem to actually fix this problem. That might be a Pandora's box to keep shut, even as I throw it out there.
You are in a different position from the one that we are in, but I think when you try to be continuous with the past theology, you have lots of handicaps. There's so many things in the past that are not authentically Christian, in my view.
Anything else, Dr. Dunn, would you like to? Okay.
I just want to say thank you. That was great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to just ask if one last question, then I think we'll wrap up. So when I was listening to you, I was thinking about the communities and communities of communities. And you seem to use that term, and I think I heard you explicitly sort of want to limit it to human communities. Not that you were also talking about the value of ecology and Pope Francis's notion of integral ecology in particular, but it sounded like you were resisting Aldo Leopold and Thomas Berry's idea of the view that we need to transition to a notion of community, which sees ourselves as part of a wider biotic community and expand the notion of community explicitly beyond the human community, to see ourselves as a part of that biotic community, not apart from it. And not that you were suggesting that we're apart from it, but
I understand, and it's
were you resisting that a little bit?
Well, the word, I mean, I gave examples of the way in which an ecology works, and it does work on the basis of, I mean, if we take the ecology that includes wolves and deer, it involves a ruthlessness toward individuals that I don't think human beings should adopt. And so I'm just having difficulty. I mean, it's very important that the human community be part of the natural ecology. But whether it's to speak of the wolves and the deer as part of the same community, that's a little rough.
So avoiding social Darwinism sounds like is your concern, if I'm understanding correctly, that adopting Darwinian ideas as guidance for social organization has not turned out well for lots of different reasons.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that if we emphasize those parts of ecology which involve cooperation, as you were noting, homeostasis, symbiosis, other forms of.
I was trying to reduce the contrast.
Gotcha. Okay.
Bring them closer together, and I very often speak of the local community as including the trees and the grass and the flowers and the animals, as well as the human beings. So, I mean, I often use the word community in a more extensive way.
And it need not be an undifferentiated community, right? It doesn't have to be flat, so to speak.
And that to really speak of a human community and abstract from the total physical environment is really a distortion. It's very, very difficult to say any of these things without saying all of them. I mean, it's easy to say them, but I just mean.
Yeah. No, I think part of what ecological economics would be doing would be to try and describe human, economy in a way that would be part of the larger biotic community in a sense. How would we be a flourishing part of that flourishing natural system? So I take that as part of what your goal was. I just wanted to clarify your hesitation there. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I would love to just use the word to think of applying the notion of ecology to human relationships, but I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, I see your point. Well, I think we are sadly at the end of our time together, everyone. I wanted to bring to your attention again. Well, first of all, let's thank Dr. Cobb again. It's really, really generous of you to share all of this time. This was wonderful to learn from you and hear from you, and to have so many people here is a real treat. Wanted to remind everybody that we've got a number of events coming up. The next one on the 29th. But throughout this semester, including Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker on Thomas Berry at the end of the semester, just a whole bunch of really interesting events. You can go at any time to gonzaga.edu/climate center events and register there, all free and open to the public. So I hope to see you at future events. The event tonight, just as a reminder, was recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. So if you go there and subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can find it at the Climate Center events website. It's on the right-hand side, past events, and you can find it there to subscribe. It was really lovely having you all.
Ringing, and I'm going.
And we're going to let all of you go. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.